Well, hello everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. My next special guest is Mr. Trevor Mueller. He is a Harvey Award nominated author with all kinds of amazing titles. Trevor, I'm super excited to go through your history and all these amazing things that you're doing, and Los Ohos, which is about to launch on Zoop. We certainly want to talk about that because that looks like a very exciting title. But first, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. I know we had a little preamble before we hit the record button, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm very excited for our conversation today. Thank you so much.
Of course, man. It's so cool to have you on, and congratulations on all your success up to this point. We do want to touch really quickly on Los Ojos, which is on Zoop, which looks like an amazing title. I think it's what 132 pages, if I'm not mistaken, of awesomeness. But before we get into that, man, can we go back? I would love just to learn a little bit more about you, Trevor. Where did this passion for storytelling start in your life? Was that at a young age? And then who was the inspiration? Was it maybe a family member or maybe a teacher? Like, where did this passion begin, and who was behind that passion that you have now?
Sure, fantastic. I have always loved to do storytelling. Visual medium in particular has been fantastic. And for me, I actually originally wanted to make movies, but at the time, like home recording sets and editing sets and those things were just unaffordable. Comic books were a very easy thing that you could make, and I used to draw comic books on lined pieces of paper, right? Picture me, I'm like 6 or 7 years old, and I'm drawing comics. My first comic creator I ever made was called The Defender of Food, and it was a superhero story about a guy who would rescue food in dire situations. So if aliens came and abducted Earth's supply of children and chocolate, he went to go save the chocolate because somebody else was going to go rescue those kids. It was that kind of silliness and goofiness and awkwardness, and I loved the visual gags and the visual nature and the way that you could kind of tell that story over time. And I've just always been making comics throughout my entire life. That character, Defender of Food, kind of stuck with me for a really, really long time. And my love of comics in particular, I think, also stemmed from the fact that, growing up, my we were in a single family household. My brother and I both like to read. We like to draw. We like to do all kinds of nerdy things. But my mom needed a break every now and then. And so when she went grocery shopping, she was like, if I leave you by the magazine stand and the comic book rack that they have there, and you behave, when I'm done, I will buy you an issue. And that's how I started to collect comic books. Like they had the old Archie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle version of Archie comics, like on the spinner racks, Zen the Intergalactic Ninja. These were some of the first titles, Sonic the Hedgehog. These are the first titles that I started to collect as a kid before I ever stepped foot inside of a local comic book shop, right? And then I started to collect like X-Men and some of those books. And I had a neighbor of mine as well that was really into the indie comic scene, and he would occasionally babysit for us. And that's how I got introduced to like the classic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic books and some of those types of titles, which were very, very different from what was mainstream, and were very, very different from any of the animated series that were coming out at the time when I was a kid, Batman, X-Men, those types of shows. So long answer to a short question, right? I've always kind of been drawing and telling stories. I've really enjoyed visual media and visual storytelling in particular. And then it was kind of a combination of, my mother's frustration of needing a little break from two kids every now and then, and the accessibility of having comics in a grocery store where everyone's shopping anyway, and a neighbor of mine that babysat and was also just kind of into comics and introduced me to a whole bunch of cool stuff on the indie scene. ElfQuest. ElfQuest is another title he introduced me to, right? Like those are fantastic, fantastic books, and very, very different from what you kind of see in the more direct market and commercial spaces.
Yeah, that's incredible. Now, what was the first title that you ever completed professionally from a professional level?
So define professional.
Or
I
indie,
started
like any,
to
yeah.
let me like G-Man, the Defender of Food, like the Defender of Food series got collected, but it was just like on lined pieces of paper, and we never made photocopies of it or anything, so it never like went into mass syndication. When I was in college, I took a break from making comics for a while because I was paying to be there, and I was like, oh, maybe I should probably start paying attention and
Not a bad idea.
make sure my grades stay up. My mom would appreciate that, right? But some friends of mine started to get into this thing called webcomics, which at the time were very, very new. They were very isolated areas where you could read comics. There weren't these hubs of comic books online like there are today, with Webtoon and Tapas and KeenSpot and some of these other ones. And so it reignited my love of storytelling. I started to do a gag series on there called, and forgive the language, but Asshole was the name of the book. It was inspired by the fact that I was listening to way too much Dennis Leary stand up at the time. And it was a story about an attractive bald guy with glasses who happened to have a roommate who was a demon from hell, a literal roommate from hell. And it just became this fun mixed media kind of experiment for me to tell these goofy little stories. And we collected those into print. So when I started to go to conventions and stuff, that was the first book I ever had on my table to sell. Did it get published? Self-published, but it didn't end up going like mainstream. And I kind of told myself when I printed the first book of that, I'll go to this convention, I'll see how I do. I had a little bit of money set aside to be like, I'll use this to like print it or go to cons or hire artists and stuff. And if I sell the books and I do well, then I'll make another one. And if I don't sell the books and do well, I'll just play more video games at home or something. And I don't play a lot of video games. So the book sold very, very well. And while we were doing that book, I noticed that there were a lot of kids and families going to conventions, but not a lot of things for kids to read at conventions. And that inspired my love, like reignited my love of Saturday morning cartoons and some of those things that got me into comics and visual storytelling to say, what if I made a comic where if I could bottle that feeling of running downstairs in your pajamas, eating a bowl of sugary cereal while you're binge watching hours and hours of television before binge watching was even a term that existed, right? If I could bottle that and put that into a series, I want to tell that comic book. And that became Albert the Alien, which is what we got nominated for the 2 Harvey Awards for.
That's incredible, man. That's incredible. Yeah, we were kind of talking before we hit the record button. There's this entire generation of young people experiencing what we loved in a lot of different formats, right? And we kind of talked about Dogman, and all of my kids are a little bit older than Dogman. I can't remember, there's Captain Underpants. There's a few other ones that certainly played a major role. And I was hoping that would transition to the comics, but then the Marvel movies came out and we were all consumed by those because they were so amazing. But I
100%.
do feel like there is a need for kind of that young adult storytelling, right? And hopefully it could be a bridge. Have you found that your title has been a bridge to other comics that maybe you have produced or are producing right now?
100%. Yeah. The thing about Albert, right? So we worked on Albert for 6 years. We self-published 4 graphic novels, over 800 pages of content. We were the first young readers syndicated series on Mark Waid's Thrillbent website.
Oh, cool.
And so you had all these people coming to Thrillbent because they wanted to read Mark Waid, and all the thing, the thing that was updating consistently was this cute little orange alien kid story, which I think a lot of people probably scratched their heads about. But we had during those 6 years, like we had readers that started with us when they were 10 years old, and then suddenly they were 16 years old, and they were like, "Well, what else do you have for me?" And I didn't have anything because I had been spending all my time and energy on making the best Albert the Alien stories that we possibly could. And so we retired the series in volume 4, finished up all the story arcs and stuff, and gave our readers a satisfying conclusion so that I could start to diversify the stories and offerings that I was working with. And this was beneficial on a number of levels. One, it allowed me to kind of challenge myself as a writer to be like, can I tell a more sophisticated story? Can I have more nuanced and layered characters? Can I have more thematic content within these stories where kids' comics are a little bit more surface level, right? Or you kind of like imply but don't necessarily show if there's danger or horrific things happening kind of off screen. Can I do some of those things? Can I flex kind of this new writer's muscle? So that was one. Two, it also allowed me to diversify the creators that I work with. And I like to try to work with a variety of different artists around the world. I currently have 2 Webtoon original series right now, Repossessed and Nexus Point. Nexus Point is a cyberpunk action story about hackers fighting bounty hunters. And I discovered an artist who had worked on a video game that nobody's ever heard of called Fortnite, who just so happened to want to draw, people with cybernetic limbs and hackers and bounty hunters duking it out in both the physical and the cyberspace. And it's fun, and it's been an incredible 2-year journey that I've been doing with that particular artist. And because it's Webtoon, you can also put in like mixed media. So we had music in there and all this stuff. A buddy of mine's a former Power Ranger actor who now does a lot of anime voice acting work, and he did the music for our series,
That's
which
pretty.
was great. Yeah, but that one's a little bit more like TV PG. Like that was what we were kind of going for from a content perspective. And it has darker themes, and it has more nuanced characters in there, people with tragic and dark pasts, and a lot of mystery throughout. All fun stuff. It was all kind of designed around like a political thriller type story structure. And then we also got greenlit the same year for Repossessed, which Repossessed was me tapping into a love of 1970s and 80s era horror stories, but embracing the fact that they are cheesy and campy by today's standards. I was like, how do we just like make that a feature of the story we're trying to tell? So it's a story about college kids that work at a pawn shop that sells cursed and demonically possessed items. And I mean, we have a man-eating toilet in the first episode. Um, and eventually the story started to kind of become, my artist Yishan Li, she's over in China. The story started to become like, well, how can we make the brand safety team at Webtoon really uncomfortable this week? and, and we just get to play with it. But it allowed us to play with a vertical format. And again, it allowed me to work with creators from different parts of the world that all had something to contribute, not just visually, but they always kind of contribute something to the story as well. I like to partner with my collaborators. And the first question I always ask them is, what do you want to draw? And what do you not like to draw? Because if you don't like drawing it, I don't want to put it in the story. And if you like to draw it, then I want to make sure that that's definitely in there and that it's front and center.
Yeah.
Because that way you're going to be putting all your heart and passion into it, and I can put all my heart and passion into it. And then you can send me things to inspire me. I can send things to inspire you. I mean, I'm working my first fantasy story right now, and I'm working with a guy who really just wanted to do like, high fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons kind of storytelling. And I had never written a high fantasy before, but I had a couple of ideas that could translate. And before I'd even start sending him like character descriptions or anything, he's like, this is who I think our lead should be, and this is what I think like the villain should be. And he just got super excited about it and really gung-ho. And for me as a creator, this becomes a really fun process because every time I get an email from these creators that I'm working with, it's like a birthday gift. And I get to unwrap it because there's some kind of gift inside, some kind of joy that I'm going to get to see. And it's something that's going to tickle my brain and just either wow me, floor me, inspire me, whatever. And I hope to do that back with those creators as well. So I now get to diversify. I now get to, not just in terms of the stories I tell, but the artists I work with, the genres that I play in. And Los Ojos is the latest incarnation of that, where this is my first mature reader's graphic novel. It's my first time playing with a long form horror story. I've done short stories, but long form kind of a horror story. And then we threw in an action element in there and some comedy because I like to do that kind of stuff in my stories anyway.
Yeah.
So there are some commonalities that you will find through some of the stories that I tell just because it's me. And there are things that I like to see within some of those stories. But I also like to try to flex those muscles every now and then and do something different and challenge myself. And hopefully that translates to either the readers that I have acquired over the years that I've been doing this, and or potentially attract some new readers out there who, when they're walking around a convention and their eyes are glazed over and they're just not seeing something, maybe something on my table will grab their attention and pull them in, and maybe we've made a fan for life.
Absolutely. You made a comment about that partnership with other creators and how receiving things from them is like opening a gift, and probably vice versa too. When they get the storyline the first time, right? It's probably sparks a lot of imagination. Can you talk a little bit about how important that relationship is with the writer, the artist, the letterer, the colorist, like all those elements coming together, and how being on the same page and working together is crucial to putting a good story together?
Yeah, 100%. The visual component of comic books is essential. And if you don't have a strong visual storyteller as a partner, then as a writer, I either have a script or I can translate that into a novel, right? Like you don't have a comic book without the art. And you don't have a good comic book without good art. And the strength of that collaboration and the want for input from those other creators helps to strengthen me and make me a stronger storyteller. And it also feeds off of our shared passion for either a character or a moment or a genre or whatever it may be. I've worked with some artists that really like a lot of detail and description in the scripts that I give. Some of them like me to give them the layouts in the description or hand draw layouts for them. Some people get really insulted when that happens. They're like, hey, look, you write the words and I make the words look pretty. Okay, buddy, like that's so everyone likes to kind of work a little bit differently. So it keeps me on my toes as a creator. It creates a degree of versatility within the stories I tell and the way that I work. And I think that that makes me very marketable as a collaborator within the publishing world, as well as within the indie comic scene. Just because most people kind of get into their groove and they just kind of keep doing their thing and they become a little immobile sometimes when it comes to those. I'm working with an editor right now on a series that hasn't been announced yet. And I have apparently set the gold standard for how he wants to work with writers because I'm a plotter. Like I go through an outline phase, a beat sheet phase, like, and then we start to move into script. And he's like, I actually know what your story is about before I read a single script page from you. He knows how it's going to go. He knows how it's going to flow. He knows how it's going to end, and he can visualize some of those pieces. And that makes our ability to collaborate stronger because then he can add in a note very early on or say, hey, wait, we need to do this, this, and this on page 32. And right now you have it on page 45, right? Like, and so we can swap those around very quickly and easily. And that's why I like to work that way. Plus, if I give myself a roadmap, it keeps me focused because I'm ADD and I tend to ramble, if you haven't noticed. But long answer to a short question once again, right? Like working with those collaborators is so essential to making a strong visual storytelling and a strong visual narrative and giving them the flexibility to be able to put their own thumbprint on what it is, be it the character designs, be it the world building, be it the visual look and feel of the story. I'm the writer and the producer, they are the director and the actors, right? Like they make all of the things that you can possibly see. And sometimes they will put things in there that need correction, right? Like, hold on, that doesn't work, or I don't think that translates quite the right way, or I think it could be more impactful this other way. But if you don't have that trust and that dialogue with each other, then you're not able to give those enhancements to the story. And you run the risk of coming off a little bit like a dictator. And there's always that trifecta of like people you want to work with, right? Are they cheap? Are they easy to work with? And are they talented? And I like to think that I'm checking at least two of those boxes. Um, you know, throw it into a diamond. It's does he have great hair?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not checking that box. Or am I? But anyway, so that's the long kind of rambled answer to the question, right? Like,
Yeah.
unless we're all working in sync, unless we're all on the same page, and unless we're all heading towards the same goal, you're not going to have as superior a product as you possibly can. And with Los Ojos and Francisco in particular, like he and I have been working together for a very long time. We made the original chapter of Los Ojos for a publisher, oh goodness, 7 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Um, and that publisher closed up and that guy decided to go make movies, and we got the rights back and I came up with an idea for a sequel, and it just so happened to not be a single issue like the original story was, which was a 25-page one and done. It'll be in the graphic novel that we're funding on Zoop, but it's more about like expanding on that world that we set up, those characters, and it gave Francisco a lot more ability to play with monster designs and world building and some of those mythology elements that we were teasing at within that original book. And now we have the ability to kind of flesh out.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be able, like, yes, I would be able to come up with those things on my own, but they're never going to be as good unless you're able to bounce those off of other creators and stuff. And certainly not if they're not 100% behind you in terms of the vision so that they can add in those visual components and make things look as cool as they do.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, let's jump right into Los Ojos. which is you could go to Zoop right now. I'll make sure I put the link below to make it very easy for everyone to click on. But let's kind of talk about that storyline, right? Because it looks pretty awesome. It follows Andres Sanchez, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
Can you kind of talk about who he is? Like I read the kind of the background. This seems the storyline and the complexity of this character and what he's going through from a personal level and the gift that he has and whether it's real or fake and like all these things are very relatable, I think, just to any kind of a person. Obviously, maybe not his skill set, but what he goes through as far as trying to figure out whether he's doing the right thing. Or I think we have those questions throughout our life and a lot of things that we try to do. Can you kind of walk through this person, Andres, and then how much of your own personal experience is part of his story or maybe people you know?
Sure. Well, Andres Sanchez, the main character in Los Ojos, is a contract killer born with an ability when he looks people in the eyes, Los Ojos in Spanish, he sees them as angels or demons.
Yeah.
His world is a very binary structure. And now that you've outed me that I greenlight or moonlight as a contract killer, I might have to visit you. No, I'm just kidding. No, but the idea with Andre stemmed from a question that we all ask ourselves as children. We ask each other as children. If we were to switch bodies and I could see the world through your eyes, would green still be green? Would pink still be pink? And I took that a step further and basically said, would people still look the same? Would I still perceive the world in the same way? And how would somebody monetize an ability to see the world differently? So Andres believes that demons walk among us disguised as people, and he's on this holy crusade to rid the world of evil. And he does that by taking on these hitman contracts, where when he looks the person in the eyes, and he sees that they are in fact demonic and evil, that's the job that he takes. That's what he does. And in the original story that we wrote, which again was like a 25-page single issue one and done story, he gets thrown a curveball. Something changes in that binary view, and it changes his perspective forever. Um, and I liked the setup of that story. And in the context of the first issue, it works as a single issue one and done, but it also has a little bit of a continuation thread able for us to build off of from there. And I like to throw my main characters curveballs. And to answer your part of the question about how does personal elements of my life start to feed into this, what gave me the idea for the sequel in the first place was I finally had kids. And for somebody who is a contract killer, top of their game, peak physical condition, mental condition, right? What would throw that character a curveball? We already gave him this curveball on his worldview and perception. But what if all of a sudden he's not sleeping through the night? What if all of a sudden he has this kid who I consider kids to be very chaotic neutral, right? Like he sees good and evil, and suddenly there's chaotic neutral in his life. And the kid's not evil, the kid's not malicious, but you didn't make that mac and cheese the way mommy made it. And I need to go potty right now. And I don't want to watch what you're watching right now. I want to watch this thing, right? And he suddenly takes on this surrogate father role for this kid that he has rescued in the original issue and the mom that belongs to the kid, and he has to figure out how to live with that and the consequences that comes with not being able to follow his routines and be in peak physical form, and this changing worldview that he has. And the other thing that really stemmed out to me too is that, Andres has this crusade that he's on to rid the world of evil. He believes that he's altruistic and helpful. What he hasn't done is anything for himself. And having that introduction of kids, yes, it comes with all the chaos that I just described, but it also comes with this unequivocal and unsolicited love that happens. And I wanted to have those moments be these points of motivation for Andres, where he's battling a particularly difficult monster, something that he's not going to be able to make it out of. And he needs that extra push to motivate him to make it through this ordeal. And we have this sequence that I absolutely love, and I think it's the third issue of this graphic novel, where Andres is in this dire situation. He's fighting this spider monster thing. He's caught up in webs. Like this lady's like pouring baby spiders into his mouth. Like, he's not gonna make it. He's gonna die. And he has this flash of this kid waiting for him at home. And what's that kid going to think if I don't come home today? And how is that going to affect me? And as a parent, that started to check all the right boxes for me as a fun, interesting twist in a story that I hadn't seen in a character like that. This morality that stems not just from this crusade that he's on, but now from this emotional connection that he is developing as a surrogate parent. So that was what really inspired me to kind of do this. And Francisco at the time was going through a similar life stage where he's like, I just had kids too. And I told him kind of, this is the pitch. This is how what we're going to do in the story. And he's like, I'm 110% behind this. Like, I'm on board. We haven't done a Los Ojos story in 7 years, but we're going to do it. And so his art style changed in that time. We put the book into color. The first volume or the first issue is going to be in color in this collection as well. So that way there's a little bit of continuity between these things. But for me, it was, that balance of the action, some of the horror elements that we wanted to throw in there, and then that emotional center to the character that adds an additional layer of complexity to him and a little bit more relatability, which is what I think your question was kind of getting at, right? Because I don't know how many people moonlight as contract killers, and if you do, I'm a good guy, I swear, and not a monster in disguise. But I think we can all relate to empathy towards a parental figure or somebody who's aspiring to be this parental figure. Kids are in danger in movies all the time, and we sympathize with the characters that are trying to rescue them. And I wanted to humanize this character a little bit more by putting some of those elements into the story.
That's amazing. Yeah. When you go to Zoop, you kind of have there's a paragraph that kind of highlights what you could expect within this comic book. One, it's 132 pages, which is absolutely awesome, right? So my assumption, and I could be wrong, but is this a complete story arc that you're getting all together, right? So there's not a part two that you have to wait for to finish story. You're getting everything at once.
So, set up kind of like a movie, you are getting a complete story with a continuation at the end, right? There's opportunity for more story there. And we've actually already almost finished volume two.
Oh, wow.
And I say almost finished because depending on how this campaign does, we may do a trilogy. That was the original pitch, was to do a trilogy for it. But if this campaign, just does well enough, then we'll just finish off in the second volume because the story's done. We know how it's going to end, and I've got one more issue of it to write. And does it become a conclusion or does it become a continuation? So it's both things, right? Like it's both a complete story and then also just like the original issue has kind of the dot 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 at the end where there is the possibility to continue the story more. But even if we never did, you would still get a satisfying conclusion.
That's awesome. There's one part in the description of this first, we'll call it chapter one, this 132 page, where Andres starts to question the ability that he has. Again, I don't think we're giving anything away because it is in there. And that's very relatable. I think most people, right, we want to do the right thing. And sometimes you're in a position where you have to make a decision, and you hope that whatever decision you take was the right for the most people, right?
Mhm.
But you always question that afterwards, especially if you've been in a position of leadership or maybe you're leading a team or something like that. You have to make tough decisions. But you could relate it in a lot of different ways. In his particular case, because he's looking into someone's eyes and he's seeing that good or evil or angelic or demonic, he's starting to question, I hope this is my skill set is correct, right? And that whatever decision I'm making based upon what I saw, hopefully that decision is aligned with what I'm trying to be, which is to rid the world of these monsters. That
Mhm.
question right there, I thought was extremely relatable just from a human aspect. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why that is such an important part of this storyline? Because I think it's very relatable
Yeah,
to most people, right?
no, for sure. Again, I wanted the story to start off, and volume one starts off with kind of that binary viewpoint. The idea was if we did a trilogy, right? Volume one would be about the world as Andre sees it, where evil exists. It's very easy to identify, and I'm able to take it out. And you do run the risk of having like those mustache twirling villains where, I'm doing evil today, right? Like we didn't we push a little bit more towards that in this volume, but we didn't want to get too maniacal with it. But volume two is more about the way the world sees Andres. And Andres is doing a thing that, again, he believes is good, but we know is a crime. Like it's wrong, it's bad. So does that make him good or evil? Does that put him in this gray area that he's still kind of trying to define? So volume two was always going to be about how the world sees Andres, and then volume three, if we ended up making it, was going to be about how Andres sees himself.
Ah,
That was the intention behind the trilogy. So while we do have some complexity to the characters and the villains that he fights in this, they are doing bad things, and it's very easy to identify that they're villains. As we get into volume two, the villains start to become a little bit more gray, right? Are they evil? Are they? And while this was not the intention, I feel like right now we as people are starting to kind of come into this area where we're starting to kind of stick to our corners, villainize other people that we otherwise might have previously spoken to about or had a discussion with. We now like this concept of groupthink. And that can be very polarizing and very dangerous because you run the risk of not empathizing with people, and you run the risk of demonizing groups of people because you're getting information from a single source and not necessarily having debate, discussion, counterpoints going on. That was never the intention of what we were doing here, but somebody had brought that up when I was talking to them about this. My intention around it was just trying to put a different spin on an unreliable narrator, and typically that's through captions. In a comic book, with this particular comic book, like we do have Andres as narrator, but we also have other narrators that will pop in sometimes within the same issue. And it hopefully helps to highlight or point out that, wait a minute, what you're seeing, what's happening in these panels may not entirely be what's actually happening in these panels. There may be, and the question is can Andres perceive things that nobody else can see that are happening right in front of them? Or is the dude nuts? Is he just certifiable? All right. And both of these could be true. You have to read the book to find out. But that's what we wanted to do, is we wanted to play with and kind of add a new twist on this unreliable narrator idea. And can we do it in a way that's not just through exposition, but can we do it in a way that is also potentially visual? So while Andres is seeing these things happening before him, these characters are also talking to him. Is what they're saying what they're actually saying? Is he putting words into their mouth or imagining that some of these things are happening, or are they actually truly happening? So I like to play with that, and again, I think it throws a curveball not only to the character but also to the reader a bit, and gives them a little bit of opportunity to interpret what is happening based on what they believe and what they like. And we do dive into more mythology in the second volume, which isn't necessarily in this one. Like I know what's happening, but I like this idea of letting the reader kind of put their own stamp on it and their own spin on it for a bit. So that was what really kind of encouraged me to tell that type of story and to make this type of characters. How many curveballs can I throw at this character who starts off with a very simple thing: good and evil exist,
yeah.
evil is bad, I will kill evil, to wait a minute, maybe that's not quite right. Right? And how do I fit into this world where I am removing evil from the world? But is that more important than something else, which is, at the end of the day, I've got somebody waiting for me at home, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And also you made a comment about how family changes you, right? So as a
Mm.
single person, the way you view the world, the actions that you take are probably a lot different once you have a family, you have small children, because the impact of your decisions, right, doesn't just affect you. Now it could affect those closest to you. And I wonder, with Andres being a father, how that has affected his viewpoint. And you don't have to, and it's probably in the comic book, so but that also is very intriguing, right? Because you'll experience a little bit of that prior to fatherhood and then after priorhood. Is that correct? And you hopefully, I'm assuming we'll kind of see a different perspective of how he's seen, and maybe that's where the questioning starts to come in.
Yeah, I won't spoil it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but but let me talk about it through the lens of fatherhood and as a writer, right? So as a writer, I am an observer of the world around me, and I take things and I turn them into stories, and I up them to the nth degree, and I try to make them as dramatic and interesting as possible. Because if they happen the way that they're happening right now, like my life is pretty boring, you know. It wouldn't be a very interesting story. But through that lens, fatherhood is a very and parenthood is a very irrational thing to have happen, because you are willingly like taking away elements of your life that you enjoy, comforts like sleeping through the night, or being able to enjoy a meal quietly while your children are like, I'm done, I'm full, I'm hungry, all of those pieces. And the pros obviously outweigh the cons, but at the same time, while you're dealing with all of those things that are frustrating about fatherhood, you would step into traffic and get hit by a car willingly to protect this child. And that is not a rational thought. And for somebody who is in a profession where he feels like sacrifice is definitely something worthy of the cause and the crusade that he is on, how does that additional level of irrationality start to play into his life? Or does that start to have the opposite effect, where sacrificing myself to rid the world of evil maybe isn't the best thing because I got somebody waiting for me at home and they need me to make mac and cheese? you know
Exactly.
and so we don't I make it sound like this is playing a bigger role in the story than it is, because it's John Wick meets John Constantine. It's about a
Yeah.
guy with guns fighting monsters. But thematically, like, these are the elements that we're trying to layer in there and start to show a little bit of those nuances into the character to make the character kind of interesting. And that love and that irrationality was missing from Andres's life previously. And so we inject it in there and we say, it's like throwing a smoke bomb into a room and closing the door, like, what's going to happen? you know, we decided to try to see what's going to happen with Andres, and where it took the story, I think, was a very interesting place.
Yeah, that's incredible. Now, as a writer, I know you've done some anthologies as well.
Mhm.
Um, Quite a few, right? You had What Fresh Hell Is This, Killer Queen, Reading with Pictures.
Mhm.
As a writer, doing maybe like short stories, right, that are kind of standalone within a larger title, and then doing a title like this where it's 132 pages, is there one that you prefer more than the other, or is it just different skill sets that you get to flex and you enjoy kind of both sides of it?
I enjoy both, and I do a lot of conventions and panels about writing and making comics. I do workshops at schools and libraries trying to inspire kind of that next generation of storyteller, to give them the skills and tools that they need to tell their stories. And I always encourage aspirational writers and comic book creators to start with a short story. And there's a few reasons for that. The first is that writing a short story is harder. It's very easy to write your 1,000-page magnum opus story, and in your head it's the perfect tale, and it's not until you sit down in front of the keyboard that you're like, oh crap, I'm an awful writer, this is a terrible story, what was I thinking, right? You start to have that imposter syndrome, you start to have that self-doubt. And really what it is if it's your first time telling a story, chances are you're not as good as you think you are. The only way that you're going to get better is by doing it. So go and tell that story. Maybe take those characters from that big epic magnum opus story that you want to do and put them in a short story, right? Like, how do they go get groceries? How do they go and get their tire fixed? How do they go and do like an everyday mundane thing that you can somehow turn into a fun and interesting adventure for them to go on? So the first reason why I like the short stories is because it's harder to write. The second reason that I like it is it's easier to finish. It's very easy for somebody to start that story, that big 1,000-page epic story, get 10 pages in, go back and reread their first pages and be like, I'm going to fix those because I've gotten better now. Well, of course you've gotten better now. You've just written 10 pages that you hadn't written previously, right? And I'm a very, I subscribe to the school of learn by doing. And there's a quote that a friend of mine used to say that I like to steal and kind of co-opt as my own, but I did not quote this. But it's, if you go back a year ago and you read something that you have made and you still think it's good, you haven't grown enough. And it's not that you were bad, it's
Yeah.
that you've gotten better. And that's not a bad thing. And I don't like to subscribe to the notion of go back and change the thing that you wrote then. It exists, it's out there. And you can't monetize it again if you sit there and rewrite it. So just keep the story going, or tell another story, or move on to the next one. So the second reason is, again, it's easier to finish. And the third reason is that depending on what your goals are from a storytelling perspective, If you're making comics, chances are you want to make comics with a publisher. If you have a completed story that is done and made, you can hand that to an editor and say, here's an example of what I do. Would you like to work with me someday? Or can I show you more? And that was how I ended up getting the Albert the Alien series on Thrillbent. That was how I ended up getting into reading with pictures. That was how my career started, was showing it to the right people, getting opportunities to come my way, and taking advantage of those opportunities to move on. And if I didn't have a physical book that I could hold in my hand, that never would have happened. And if I was trying to write some 1,000-page story that I was never going to finish, it never would have happened. So I give a lot of credit, and I really enjoy the challenge of writing short stories for anthologies. I'm pitching another one right now, actually, because it is fun to play in kind of a shorter format and a shorter world. Simultaneously, there is a lot more work involved and a lot more nuance involved in telling those larger, broader kind of stories. And for this being my first time, I've told other horror stories before. I've done them in short forms, 5 pages, 10 pages, 15 pages. But to tell the longer story was something I hadn't done yet. And so this was a new muscle that I kind of got to flex, which for me is fun and exciting, and an interesting challenge. And I like to challenge myself to always do new things and get out of my comfort zone. So kind of a roundabout answer to your question, right? Like I like doing both. For people who are just starting out, I recommend starting with short for the three reasons that I gave. And it's very, very easy and inexpensive to print that short story, right? Like you can go to a Kinko's and get it printed and staple it at home and go sell it at your table for $10 if you want to go to a library show or a craft show or heck, a comic convention, if you want to do that. Very, very easy to do. I'd say that the biggest hurdle to making comics has always been a financial one. And that's why crowdfunding sites like Zoop have helped to overcome that financial hurdle. I mean, Los Ohos is done. Like, I have paid for the art to be made. I've absorbed those costs in order to have this book be completed. All we need to do is print it.
Yeah.
And that's what Zoop is going to pay for. It's going to pay for the printing of the book. And then through selling the book, like I'll make my money back on the artist stuff. Like my artist gets paid regardless. And so and this is a way that I can translate the stories in my head that I enjoy and allow other people to enjoy them too. Because the last point that I'll end up making, one of my very first conventions that I went to was this tiny little convention that doesn't exist anymore. But some buddies of mine had gotten me on the guest list, so I had no expenses. I was set up there. I had my one little asshole book on the table, and I was selling books. I was riding on adrenaline, like I was feeling pretty great. And I looked over at my buddy and was like, "Hey, man, is there a better feeling in the world than like putting all your blood, sweat, and tears into a book and being able to hold it in your hand?" And he goes, "Yes, there is. Seeing that same book in somebody else's hand while they are waiting for you to sign it because they've just bought it from you." And he was not wrong. Uh, it is a very, very feeling of elation that you get from doing that, especially as an indie creator, to put all of yourself into the story and to share it with the world. And that's what we're hoping to accomplish with Los Ojos. Is I had the story idea about a hitman who may or may not be seeing reality, who fights monsters and also has a little bit of family struggle going on at home that keeps it funny and interesting. And I wanted to tell that story to the world, and so I did, and that's why we're here.
We're here. That's why we're here. And Zoop is a fairly new. There's a lot of amazing crowdfunding sites. But we were kind of talking before we hit the record button, how stressful they could be, right? You have this peak at the very beginning, and then you have this valley of nothingness that happens in between. And then like the last 5 days, you're like, please let me hit my goal because it's all or nothing, right? And Zoop has been an amazing tool that takes away a lot of that, especially like the packing and the shipping. And so from a creator standpoint, to have a lot of that stress removed by partnering with the Zoop, I think it's got to be a pretty good feeling too, right? Because it's already stressful what you're doing. Now throw on
Mhm.
top of that, when it is successful, having to fulfill and do all this other stuff too has got to be like, nothing more frustrating than that. I mean, it's a happy frustration because you're fulfilling orders that people believed in you, but man, it's a lot of work. So, I mean, Zoop has come on the scene, and I think have kind of changed the game with what they're willing to do, even from a marketing standpoint of helping to
Mhm.
push your I mean, that's how we met is through
Yeah.
Zoop, right? And pushing it out and saying, "Hey, man, this amazing creator's got something cool going on, man. Why don't you have a discussion?" So,
You know,
yeah, how happy
you
have you
think
been
about
with Zoop?
the Oh, I've been very happy with Soup. You think about the job title of comic creator, writer, artist, whatever, and the last thing that anyone thinks about is like, ah, yes, order fulfillment, logistics and administrative work. Oh, do I have the right items going to the right addresses? When we funded 4 volumes of Albert the Alien on Kickstarter. Right. And I did all that myself, the marketing, the organization, the interviews, the organization of all the interviews, right? Like all that stuff. And then the order fulfillment. My wife and I would just set up what I called base camp in our giant, in a kitchen table. We'd put in all the leaves and extend it out as long as it would go. And at one end, we had like the printer for the labels and the envelopes that we were putting all the books in and whatnot. And then I had like 2 laptops set up, one to print that stuff out, and then one to kind of double and triple check the orders. And it took us like a day or a weekend, depending on how many orders we had to fulfill, to do all that. That was before we had kids. you know, I mean, we did the last Albert the Alien. The Kickstarter ended in 2018. The orders and fulfillment went out in 2019. Uh, and so when I was looking to get back into the game, I was asking friends like for recommendations because the crowdfunding scene and the capabilities on those websites have changed dramatically since the last time I was on there. One. Two, the last book I Kickstart funded was a kid's book. It was an all ages adventure story about the first foreign exchange student from outer space. Would those readers be interested in a hitman who kills demons with guns? I don't know. That seems like a bit of a stretch. And so I didn't know how much my audience was going to translate when Kickstarter sends out that email, back another campaign from Trevor, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, another cute alien story. What is this?"
All kinds of angry
Um,
comments from parents.
Right. So I was asking friends. A couple of them had already backed or had already created a couple of campaigns and launched them on Zoop and had very positive things to say. And what pushed me over the edge was my editor friend Heather Antos. I was asking her for recommendations, and she introduced me to the guys over at Zoop, and we had a very pleasant conversation. And they talked about the services that they offer, which you're right, like it's not just hosting the event, but it's helping with the marketing, it's doing the order fulfillment, it's connecting you to the printer. They've already done all the print quotes and stuff like that, so I don't have to reach out to 7 printers and say, who's got the best rate and who's going to give me the best quality, and has anyone else worked with these people? Like they can speak to it, and they have those established relationships with them, so there's a degree of trust there that I don't have to make myself. I can breathe easier and relax a little bit more and focus more on what I do best, which is the creation, right? And then obviously talking about the project to people like yourself. But like that allows me to kind of focus. And to me, that was a really comfortable stepping stone to get back into the crowdfunding space versus this animosity that I was feeling about the idea of making a Kickstarter for this. I mean, I started making a Kickstarter for one time for this book, and I just got overwhelmed because I was like, I don't know if I want to pull the trigger on this, until I talked to Zoop.
Yeah.
And Zoop was like, we can do all that stuff that you're nervous about, we can do that stuff for you. And I was like, oh, I have a partner in this. And to me, that's one of the things that I love is that collaboration and that partnership, not just in the creation of the content,
Yeah.
but now in getting that content out into the world.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's real quickly take a picture or take a look. So here it is. Go to Zoop, and I'll put the link below. Los Ojos of the Dead. Like you said, it's that John Wick, John Constantine, which is a crazy, amazing combination. So that if that doesn't sell you, I don't know what else is going to sell you. I mean, those two characters alone are freaking awesome. But yeah, it gives you, like you said, this is where I read kind of the backdrop as to what you could expect from the story. And I've already subscribed, but right where it says thank you, there'll be an email where you just throw your email in there. And then as soon as you hit the button on your side, Trevor, or Zoop hits the button on the launch date, all of a sudden everyone will get an email saying, hey, head over to this link. You can now make your purchase. Do you have a date of when this will go live yet, or has that been announced?
Yeah, May 21st, we're going to go live. I don't know what time, but it'll be sometime on May 21st. And the other thing that I can announce too, because this came out quite recently. So the cover image that you're seeing right there is the original cover design that we were going to have. That's from Francisco Iaquinta, the artist of the series. I just talked to my friend who agreed to do a cover for us, and only Zoop backers are going to get access to this cover.
Oh,
There's
wow.
no design for it yet, so we haven't been able to share it yet. But while the campaign is going on, we're going to share the design and eventually update the images. But it's my buddy Ben Templesmith. So
Oh,
when you think horror comics, I immediately think Ben Templesmith, and the fact that he was willing to do a cover for this project was super stellar. So only Zoop backers will get access to that cover.
wow.
If I can shamelessly self-promote one final time.
Yeah.
And so yes, there will be a cover like this if you want to get that cover, cool. But the Ben Templesmith version of the cover will only be available through Zoop.
That is awesome, man. That is awesome. Well, I cannot wait to get into this, Trevor. It looks awesome. The storyline looks incredible. I love the relatability of Andres. I feel like as a father, there's a lot of things you can relate to. But even the storyline and his abilities and how he's utilizing those abilities and how he thinks he's doing the right thing of ridding the world of monsters, all of that is right up my alley. From a genre perspective, what are you calling this? Is it an action horror? Like probably those two are the
Yeah,
biggest ones, probably. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, supernatural action horror. It's got horror elements in there, but again, a lot of guys jumping through the air, firing guns as well.
Nice.
Lots of punching and kicking. Yeah, we try to keep it fun and entertaining throughout, and then have some of those horror elements. Some of them are grotesque, some of them are more psychological. I like to play.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, this looks absolutely amazing, Trevor. I'm sure you're working on a lot of other things too. It's exciting to know that when someone does purchase this, and they enjoy it, that there are plans for more. So obviously, we want to get the word out so we could get that third volume by making this one super successful. So we'll definitely push this out to all social media and anybody that's watching. Make sure you get over to Zoop. Use the link below. Make sure that you click on that link, throw in your email. In 5 days, this thing's going to launch, and when it does, Zoop will make it super easy. They'll send you the link, and you just click the link and go right to the site, and there you can make your purchase. And it sounds like there's going to be a couple options as well, which is very exciting from a collector standpoint. Like
Mhm.
goofballs like me that just can't get one cover, they got to get both covers. So very exciting. Is there anything that we're leaving out, Trevor, that we want to make sure that we highlight?
Yeah, two things I'll say as well. As add-ons for the campaign too, we're going to have a couple of slots available where Francisco Iaquinta, my artist, will either do sketches or commissions for people. Because he's in Italy, it will be a digital copy, but we could also print it for you if you want to get a nice printed version of it. If you ask him to draw Silverhawks for you, you will be his best friend. That dude loves Silverhawks.
Nice.
But so we'll have limited numbers of those. So you'll definitely want to get notified when we launch so that you can take advantage of those while they last.
Beautiful.
The other thing that I'll mention too, because you mentioned other projects that I'm working on, I'm going to actually include a couple of first issues of different stories that I am working on unrelated to Los Ojos as add-ons for this book. So you can get some of my other books that are going to be coming out soon. I did another horror, kind of a detective crime noir story called Demon City. I have kind of an suburban fantasy story. Think Harry Potter without the school, called The Witches of Eastwick Boulevard. The entire Albert the Alien series will be available on there, both digitally and physically. So if you want to get all 4 volumes of Albert the Alien at a reduced price, you can also get those through there as well. I also know that money is tight for a lot of people right now. And so the second thing that I want to say is that even if you can't back the campaign, which is obviously my preference, but if you can't back the campaign, just sharing it with somebody that you think would be interested in this, somebody who likes John Wick or likes Constantine or likes horror stuff or likes supporting indie comic book creators, it's a huge thing just to be able to share the link, share this video, tell people about it, and get the word out there, because that helps tremendously. Because even if you're not interested, maybe one of them are. And so even if you're not able to back it directly, please consider just sharing it and talking about it a little bit, because that would go a long way. I would be forever grateful. And it does help indie creators like me and gives us a degree of support that costs nothing.
Yeah. And then how can people follow you on social media, Trevor? Are you kind of on all platforms, and what do they type in to follow you?
Yeah, Trevor A. Mueller is my website, trevoramueller.com. I have a newsletter on there that you can subscribe to if you would like to. It comes out monthly. I won't spam you. I don't have time to write it more often. But Trevor A. Mueller is my handle on just about every single platform. So I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, TikTok, YouTube. Find me, follow me, friend me on your platform of choice. And then obviously too, if we'll give people the option who sign up for getting notified for the Zoop campaign, if you would like to join my newsletter there, that's a way to see all the different projects that I'm working on, behind the scenes stuff, sometimes years before they even come out, if I can talk about them that early. And I'm not just doing comic stuff, I'm doing some movie stuff with some buddies of mine that used to be on Power Rangers. I'm doing a couple of animation things and trying to do novels as well. So there's a lot of variety in what I like to do. Because some of that is my ADD, and some of that is just the fact that I like to have something for everyone on my table. And so even if I haven't made it yet, chances are I'm going to make it at some point in the future. And so again, any support that people are able to throw at this campaign, either financially or with a share, is much appreciated for a creator like me.
And then lastly, I noticed if you go to thomasamueller.com, you will see
Trevor.
I'm Trevor, I'm sorry. I'm Tom. Trevor, TrevorAMueller.com. You will also see some of the Comic Cons that you are doing over the next, I guess, maybe 4 months or so. Can you kind of talk about where you're going to be, and if people have some of these titles, they could probably bring them to get signed, I would think.
Yeah, 100%. So I do a lot less conventions now than I did before I had kids, and I've already done 2 or 3 of them so far this year. I
Yeah.
think my next one is Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina. So it's my first time at that show, and I will be a guest of honor at the show.
Nice.
I've heard tremendous things. I'm very excited. I've never done a con in Charlotte before, so I'm really, really excited to be at that convention. I'm going to be doing Fan Expo Chicago, which is one of my hometown shows. I live just north of the city. And so that's in Rosemont, Illinois. I'm very excited to be returning to that show as well. I took last year off because I think it was one of my kids' birthdays
Makes
when it
sense.
was going on. So took a year off. Now I'm coming back. And then SuperCon over in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's a tiny little show that just keeps growing. The first year I was there, they expected 3,000 people. They had 5. The next year I went, they had 7. Last year I did not go, they had 10. This year they've got a whole bunch of people from Star Trek Discovery coming in, and people who've done like the Grogu Mandalorian puppetry and stuff like that, like the designs for the characters. They're bringing in all of these really, really talented creature effects guests and actors, and then they've obviously got comic book guests like myself and Ben Templesmith and a bunch of other people like that. So Sioux Falls, South Dakota, I'll be at that one, and then I'm still waiting to hear on New York. So I might be at New York later this year as well. But those are the conventions that I have planned for right now, as well as a bunch of local library workshops and events as well. But if you go to trevoramueller.com, my events tab will take you to all the latest and greatest stuff that I'm doing. So as new events become available, or as I get signed on to be guests at these shows, I can add them onto that list on the website.
That's awesome, Trevor. Well, Trevor, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you allowing me to spend some time with you to get to know you a little bit better. Obviously, talking about Los Ojos, which I cannot wait. I've already signed up, so I'm just waiting for my email to say now is the time, and we'll go over there and make sure we make that purchase. But the story looks amazing, the art looks amazing, and I cannot wait to see you be successful on Zoop with this title.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the support. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the platform to talk about it. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, it's going to be a wild ride. I think it's going to have some fun twists and turns because again, I like to throw curveballs at my characters. I like to throw curveballs at my readers. So hopefully there'll be a couple of things in there that will surprise you in pleasant ways. And I would of course love to hear what you think about it once it comes out and you get a copy. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely, Trevor. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and an amazing weekend, my friend.
Thanks, you too, buddy.
All right, talk soon.